Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook, cover to cover. Today, we are in World War I, long anticipated, 200 pages of context setting in our wake. Today, Section 3, Chapter 27. Yesterday, Franz Ferdinand passes away on Serbia's 2-year anniversary of freedom after 500 and some odd years of being under the thumb of the Ottoman rule. Well, the Ottoman Empire is very much on its last legs here in 1914, June 28th. Let's begin where we left off. A new kind of conflict, Section 3, Chapter 27. Thank you, John Michael. Like, subscribe, yes. Setting the scene, the Great War, as newspapers soon called it, was the largest conflict in history up to the time. The French mobilized almost 8.5 million men, the British 9 million, the Russians 12 million, the Germans 11 million. But for those who fought, the statistics were more personal. 1 out of every 4 men who went out to the World War did not come back again, recalled a survivor. And of those who came back, many are maimed and blind, and some are mad. The early enthusiasm for the war soon faded. There were no stirring cavalry charges, no quick and glorious victories. This was a new kind of war, far deadlier than any ever fought before. The Western Front. New heading. As the war began, German forces swept through Belgium toward Paris. German generals, however, soon violated the Schlieffen Plan. Russia mobilized more quickly than expected. After Russian forces won a few small victories in eastern Prussia, Germany hastily shifted some troops to the east. That move weakened German forces in the west. In September 1914, when British troops reached France, they joined the French along the Marne River. The Battle of the Marne pushed back the German offensive and destroyed Germany's hopes of a quick victory on the Western Front. Both sides then dug in for the winter. They did not know that the conflict would turn into a long, deadly stalemate. A deadlock in which neither side is able to defeat the other. Battle lines in France would remain almost unchanged for years. Trench warfare. On the Western Front, the warring armies borrowed a vast system of trenches, starting from the Swiss frontier in the English Channel. An American war correspondent described the scene. There were vast stretches of mud, of fields once cultivated but now scarred with pits, trenches, rusty barbed wires. The roads were rivers of clay. They were lined with dugouts, cellars, and caves. These burrows in the earth were supported by beams and suggested a shaft in the disused mines. Richard H. Davis wrote that. An underground network linked bunkers, communication trenches, and gun emplacements. There, millions of soldiers roasted under the broiling summer sun or froze through the long winters. They shared their food with rats and their beds with lice. Between the opposing trench lines lay no man's land, like in tennis. No man's land in tennis is you have the baseline, And then you have the tee box, right? Tee box that you have to serve into one of those two boxes. And you have the baseline. No man's land is between that. You shouldn't be standing there. In trench warfare, it's where you'll probably get shot with a gun. Between the opposing trench lines was no man's land. In this empty tract, In this empty tract, pocked with shell holes, every house and tree had long since been destroyed. Through coils of barbed wire, soldiers peered over the edge of their trenches, watching for the next attack. They themselves would have to charge into this man-made desert when officers gave the order. Sooner or later, soldiers would obey the order and go over the top. With no protection but their rifles and helmets, they charged across no man's land towards the enemy lines. With luck, they might overrun a few trenches. In time, the enemy would launch counterattack with similar results. Each side then rushed in reinforcements to replace the dead and wounded. Each side then rushed in reinforcements to replace the dead and wounded. The struggle continued back and forth over a few hundred yards of territory. Costly battles. In 1916, both Allies and Central Powers launched massive offensives to break the stalemate. German forces tried to overwhelm the French at Verdun. The French sent up a battle cry, "They shall not pass." The French defenders held firm, but the 11-month struggle cost more than 500,000 casualties on both sides. An Allied offensive at the Somme River was even more costly. In a single grisly day, 60,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded. In the 5-month battle, over 1 million soldiers were killed, without either side winning an advantage. They call that the old lose-lose situation there. Technology of modern warfare is the new heading. Modern weapons added greatly to the destructiveness of the war. Rapid-fire machine guns mowed down waves of soldiers, making it nearly impossible to advance across no man's land. Artillery allowed troops to shell army lines and cities from more than 10 miles away. 10 miles away, wow. In 1915, Germany began using poison gas that blinded or choked its victims, or caused agonizing burns and blisters. Later that year, Allies also began to use gas. Those soldiers were eventually given gas masks. Poison gas remained one of the most dreaded hazards of the war. One British soldier recalled the effect of being gassed. "I suppose I resembled a kind of fish with my mouth open, gasping for air. It seemed as if my lungs were gradually shutting up, and my heart pounded away in my ears like a beat of a drum. To get air into my lungs was real agony." William Pressey, People at War, 1914-1918, by Moynihan. Although poison gas could be fatal, it was an uncertain weapon. Shifting winds might blow the gas back in the side that launched it. In 1916, Britain introduced new weapon, the armored tank. Mounted with machine guns, tanks were designed to move across broken ground through barbed wire. Still, the first tanks moved slowly and broke down often. They did little to break the stalemate. Both sides used aircrafts. At first, planes simply observed empty troop enemy troop movements. In 1915, Germany used Zeppelins, large gas-filled balloons, to bomb the English coast. Later, both sides equipped airplanes with machine guns. Pilots known as Flying Aces battled in the skies. These dogfights were spectacular, but had little effect on the course of war. Submarines proved much more important. German submarines roamed the Atlantic. These U-boats did tremendous damage to the Allied side, sinking merchant ships that carried vital supplies to Britain. To counteract submarine warfare, the Allies organized convoys, or groups of merchant ships protected by warships. As you will read, Germany's policy of restricted submarine warfare would eventually help bring the United States into war. Here's a picture of a U-boat over here. Okay. Global conflict. New heading. Of Europe's eastern front, battle lines swayed back and forth, sometimes over large areas. Casualties even rose higher than in the western front, but the results were just as indecisive. Eastern Europe, in August 1914, Russian armies pushed into eastern Germany. Then, at the Battle of Tannenberg, the Russians suffered one of the worst defeats of the war, causing them to retreat. After Tannenberg, armies in the east fought on Russian soil. As the least industrialized of the great powers, Russia was poorly equipped to fight the modern war. Troops sometimes lacked even rifles. Still, Russian commanders continued to throw masses of peasant soldiers into combat. Southern Europe. Southern Europe was another battleground. In 1915, Bulgaria joined the Central Powers and helped crush its old Balkan rival, Serbia. That same year, Italy declared war on Austria-Hungary and later on Germany. Italy had signed a secret treaty with the Allies to gain Austrian-ruled lands inhabited by Italians. In October 1917, the Austrians and Germans launched a major offensive against the Italian position at Caporetto. The Italians retreated in disarray. British and French forces later helped stop the Central Powers' advance in Italy. Still, Caporetto proved a disastrous for Italy, as Tannenberg was for Russia. The war outside Europe. Although most of the fighting took place in Europe, World War I was a global conflict. Japan, allied with Britain, used the war as an excuse to seize German outposts in China and islands in the Pacific. It also tried to impose a protectorate on China. A protectorate on China. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers in 1914. The Turks then closed off Allied ships from the Dardanelles, Dardanelles, vital strait connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. In 1915, Allies sent a massive force to the force of British, Indian, Australian, and New Zealander troops to open up the strait at the Battle of Gallipoli. Turkish troops tied down the trapped Allies on the breaches. In January 1916, after 10 months and more than 200,000 casualties, the Allies finally withdrew from the Dardanelles. In turn, the Turks were hard hit in the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire included vast areas of Arab land. In 1916, Arab nationalists led by Hussein ibn Ali declared a revolt against Ottoman rule. The British sent Colonel T.E. Lawrence, later known as Lawrence of Arabia, to support the Arab revolt. Lawrence led guerrilla raids against the Turks, dynamite bridges, and supply trains. Eventually, the Ottoman Empire lost a great deal of territory to the Arabs, including the key city of Baghdad. War and the colonies. European colonies were drawn into a struggle. The Allies overran scattered German colonies in Africa and Asia. They also turned to their own colonies and dominions for troops, laborers, and supplies. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand sent troops to Britain's aid. Colonial recruits from British, India, and French West Africa fought on European battlefields. People in the colonies had mixed feelings about serving. Some were reluctant to serve the imperial powers. "When we speak of joining," remarked the South African man, "our women curse and spit at us, asking us whether the government for whom we propose to risk our lives is not the one which sends the police to our houses at night or tramples upon us." The colonial troops volunteered eagerly. They expected that their service would be a step towards citizenship or independence. As you will read, such hopes were dashed after the war. Thank you. John Michael. Context is Everything Media Network. Like, subscribe. Thank you. #1 in dog viewership. Canines love it. Put it on for your dog. Let the playlist run. Just let it go while you're away. Sometimes home brings you away. And sometimes your dog needs company. Context is Everything Media Network is here for all of your canine viewership needs, as well as historical context for you. Thank you. God bless.